Okay, so now we created our first base data set, and we did that with the help of with the help of a file, right? Now if you see, this is how my data looks. So here I have a worker, the employee name, there's some plan which is assigned to the worker, which is the stock grant plan. This is plan ID, this is corresponding plan name, and then it shows, for example, for Logan McNeil, let's see, he is supposed to, she has been granted 100 stocks or whatever, 300 are still pending, and then the first one would be granted on 21st Jan, which is 100, and so on and so forth. So the same information, if you see, I have separated in three different blocks, right? One is vesting date 1 and then the corresponding quantity, vesting date 2 and the corresponding quantity, vesting date 3 and corresponding quantity. Now what I actually need is, so here is how we have vesting date 1 and vesting date QTY, let's say, and then vesting date 2 and then the corresponding quantity, and then vesting date 3 and then the corresponding quantity. So for example, Logan McNeil, this is how data looks with for our first employee. It is 2021, let's say, and the quantity is 100. 2022, the quantity is, let's say, 200 or whatever, and 2023, the quantity is again 100. So this is how the data looks. Instead, this is what I need from this data. I only want the vesting dates and I want the vesting quantities. So what I actually want is, vesting dates are 2021, 2022 for each worker, whoever has the data, 2023, and the amount is 100, 200 and 100. So because this is all same data, I don't want data in different columns. I want all data together in this format, right? Now we can do that with the help of
Okay.
ours, right? So again, for employee 1, control X, this is how it should look. So EMP1, EMP1 and EMP1. Earlier, how was this looking for me? It was for EMP1, this was the, then EMP2, again vesting date. So this is how the current data is. I want this to show up in this format, right? Because usually this is how data looks. Okay, so for that, I'm going to add a new stage, and the stage is called an unpivot stage, right? But the problem is I cannot add an unpivot stage directly on a base data set. Now, I cannot also add this stage after joining, because after you join, then the data doesn't come properly. So what I'll have to do is, let's look at our data catalog lineage now first. So we have three base data sets which are currently flowing in here, and then this is a separate base data set that we have created till now. I'm going to create a new derived data set wherein I would unpivot this data. So this data, I would unpivot it this way. And the reason I have to create a new derived data set is because, as I mentioned, as such, system doesn't allow me to add an unpivot stage directly on a base data set. The second thing, I could have done one more thing. I could have joined this BDS04 file worker stocks. I could have joined it into this data set, for example, and then unpivoted it. But then as I mentioned, if you first join and then unpivot, then data is not coming properly. At least that's what Workday doesn't say any such logic, but then this is what I have observed. So I always prefer unpivoting whenever there is a need and then doing any further operations. So that's what I'm going to do now. So I'm going to create a new derived data set wherein my WB November 17th, base data 0104. This is what I'm going to take in. This data set I'm calling as number. This is my DDS01, sorry, DDS123. So this is my derived data set 04, and this is at the first level. And I'm still calling it worker stocks and November 17th, and save this. Okay, now let's go ahead and edit this. So let's look at one employee as an example. If you see here, I have Logan McNeil, and again, if I scroll to the right, Logan McNeil has three grants: vesting date 1, which is 2021, and 2, and so on and so forth. So now I'm going to add an unpivot stage. Now when I'm adding an unpivot stage, I'll have to basically specify. So if you see, my requirement is this date and this one and this one, they have to be joined together into a single column, right? So I'll select those dates that I want, those columns that I want to unpivot. So my first column is vesting date 01. My second column is vesting date 02. And my third column is vesting date 03. And I'll this is my input, and this is the new fields that would get created. So I'm calling it vesting schedule, and this call I'm calling it vesting dates, right? Okay, on exactly that way, if you see, I also have to unpivot the amounts as well. So this and this quantity and this quantity, they all have to flow into this single column. So now I'm adding another one by clicking on this plus, and here my input field is the vesting quantity 01, and then vesting quantity quantity vesting 02, and then quantity vesting 03, right? And I'm calling it quantity schedule, and let's call this quantity values, whatever, or schedule values, right? I would come out of it and click on date. Now when you see, for Logan McNeil, it has now given me 3 rows of data instead of a single row. So here what I see is vesting date 01, 02, and 03, which is 1st of Jan 2021, 22, and 23, and the corresponding amount everywhere I've just 100. If you see, the total outstanding amount was 300, granted amount was 100, which would be granted over 3 periods, right? So I've been able to unpivot my columns into a single, multiple columns into a single column. Does it
So
make
is
sense?
it similar to the yeah. Is it
Converting
similar to
rows
the
into
Excel
columns and rows.
pivot?
Sorry?
Is it similar to Excel pivot? Can
Yes.
I say?
I
Okay.
will.
Because but it's bit interesting on how you're taking up those columns individually while you're doing the pivot. Yeah, sounds good.
Okay. So now I have, from this base data set, I have created a derived data set, and that derived data set I'll now join into my this derived data set. So this is my final derived data set. Let's write down the unpivot stage. So an unpivot stage, as I mentioned, stage enables converting data from columns to rows, allowing you uh, to arrange data in whatever format, right? It enables, so the crux is it allows you to enable columns to rows. The second thing, it is applicable on all field types. So you can unpivot. Now, if you see, we unpivoted two different field types. One was of type date, and the second one was probably a type number, right? That 100. So it is applicable for all field types, right? Okay. So now I have this derived data set. Let's open this in a new tab, and then we'll finally join this one, which has the employee stock details, with this one. Prism is not a very complex thing to learn, right? It's
Yeah.
relatively easy.
Yeah.
Okay, so now so it's all about, do you know this, those stages? And that is all a Prism is, just stages. And if you know
Okay.
calculated fields, and those are also
Okay.
relatively simple, because once you know
Yeah.
Excel functions, they are almost relatively simple.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And you have worked on databases, right? I think it's much more easier for you compared to me. I, for example, am not an expert in Excel functions or databases. So it took
I
me a
think
lot
for
of,
me, yeah, so for me, I'm also not that great with databases, but I
but
can
at
manage.
least you have a clue, because when I listened to join and union, it took me a lot of time to understand that. I had no clue what is a
Yeah.
join, what is a union. So
Okay.
that way,
Okay. Yeah. I have some idea. I cannot say I'm the master in it, but yeah.
right. Okay, finally, now I'm going to join my this derived data set, which is basically our final, almost final data set, with this one that we have just created. So I can go in there, select this derived data set, and select it, right? Again, how do I join it? I would join it based on the worker name and the work employee. So here, worker name would club to worker, and let's see if there is a match. So there is match, and and worker ID, which is basically employee ID, it clubs to uh, employee ID here, right? And because we are doing a left outer join, it will get all data from the left column, with wherever there is no value, it will get null. Okay, let's go to our primary data set. I want to select everything, and from my secondary data set, I want to select everything again except for the worker ID and the worker name. So this is our final data that we are going to get, trying to get from all the different sources. And we have been able to join all of them together. All right. Okay. Now let's talk about a few calculated field functions. So now that I have my data ready, probably I want to add a few calculations, a few Prism calculations to this data, right? I'll add a few simple one. All right, so now this is my final join, and there are lots of calculations available. But let's say, uh, okay, so for example, I have date of birth and I have hire date. I want to get the age on hire. This is one of the common calculations I do, right? So age on hire, if you see, I just want to find the difference between the hire date and the date of birth, right? Which would give me the age of the employee when he was hired, right? So I want to add a new calculated field, right? Wherein, if you see, I have to find the difference between the hire date of the employee and date of birth. So when I click on plus, it adds a new calculated field for me. I am going to rename this, call it age on hire, right? Okay, and then you can add a Prism expression. The expression would be available in the functions library. Okay, some of the most common use cases for creating your Prism calculated fields. Okay, now the function that I'm looking for is related to date, right? I want to find the difference between two dates. So if I go to date, you'll see there are a lot of date related functions. For example, I can find the difference between two dates in terms of days, in terms of hours, in terms of milliseconds. If you see, this is all my date related function, my create calculated field, and we can find difference between two dates, right? I want to find the year difference. So I'll click on the moment I bring my cursor here. If I bring my click on this arrow, it will show me a short description of that function. It would show me a syntax. It would show me the value that is returned, and for example, the an example. So here, if you see, i- here we are trying to calculate the age of the employee, right? So difference in terms of years now and user's birth date. So now would return the current time and the current date. So I would click on this plus. The moment I click on this plus, it would add that expression automatically for me. So when I click on plus, if you see, this expression gets added. What I can do is I can click on this bar, and when I do that, system opens me that edit expression bar. And this is especially helpful when you have very big expressions. Okay, now if I enter anything, right? So I just entered AD or AD, some random text. When you enter something directly, system shows you all the Prism calculations available with that. But here, if you see, I have to find the difference between two rows of data or two columns of data, right? Which is basically two fields. So when that is the case, I'll simply enter this square bracket. The moment I enter one side bracket, system automatically closes the other one. So if I have to add any fields, I'll have to select square bracket. Again, right, sorry. Right now, if I enter anything, I would only get the calculations available. But the moment I enter the left square bracket, system automatically adds the right one. And then it shows me all the fields which are available, right? So now I want to find the difference between hire date and date of birth and apply. If there is any error, it will show me a error. So let's say I remove this one, and now I say Okay, right? It shows me that there is an error, right? So wherever there is an error, it will give me an error message. And now when I say this, let's see. All right. Okay. So a lot of date related functions are with respect to difference, right? This and that and this and that.
Mm,
The second thing,
yeah.
okay. We also have a
So
few.
sorry,
Mhm.
this
Sure,
has
go
a
ahead.
lot of decimal points after
Right.
that, right?
Yes. So the
After
default
decimal,
return
there are a lot of.
value, yes. So the default
Uh,
return value is double. But then when we spoke about the manage field stage, so next we'll obviously have to add a
ah,
manage field stage to manage the output. But
okay.
the default
Okay.
return value for this function is a double,
Double type. Okay.
right?
Okay. Makes
So
sense. Yeah.
we can always go ahead and change those values. Okay. Similarly, as I
Sure.
mentioned, there are a number of instance related functions. Now, if I go in here, let's look at uh, additional job. Now, additional job, basically, if you see, this is a multi-instance field,
Yeah.
right? Which means employee
Yeah.
can have zero additional jobs or more than one additional job or one additional job as well.
Right.
So
Right.
let's
Oh,
if if you see for this worker, for example, this worker has two additional jobs, Joyce Sandoval,
yeah.
right? So now what I want is I want a few instance related functions. So let's say simply put, I want to count the number of additional jobs that a given worker has, right? So I'm going to add a new Prism calculated field that I'm calling it uh, additional jobs count.
So I don't know if this will be covered, but just curious, can
Mhm.
we use a field in a field? Like you have created the date field,
Yes, we
right?
can.
Can
We
we
can.
use,
We can.
okay. It's similar to calc fields, right? Then
Yes, it is similar to calc.
maybe with less functions. Okay.
Right. Right. So we can use one expression within another. Okay. So for example, I can convert date into a string and then do a substring.
Yeah. Okay. Makes sense.
Uh, okay, so additional jobs count. Let's go to the functions library. Here we have a number of instance related functions, right? So I can, for example, check if the number of instances is equal to zero or anything as an example. Uh, right now, what my requirement is, we can create similar to ESI, EMI, we can create a multi-instance field, right? We can also check if a given instance or among those instances is there a specific value, right? So for example, an employee can have multiple addresses. I can check among those addresses, is there an address in New York, for example. So I can check if instance contains any of these given values, right? And then instance is a superset. Again, I can see a number of arguments, and then I can say, is this instance a superset of these arguments? Which means it will have all of those arguments, plus it may have any additional arguments, right? Okay, so if you see, an instance is a superset of is a row function that compares a multi-instance field uh, to a list of instance values that you have included and returns true if every instance value exists. And it may have additional values as well, right? So if I say if employee's address is New York and Boston or Boston, this employee's address could be New York, Boston, and New Jersey, then it will return true. But any which ways. Okay, so I want to count the number of instances, a very simple function. If you look at the description, it gives you the number of instances in a multi-instance field. I am selecting the instance count. Again, I am adding my left square arrow, and the moment I do that, I can select additional jobs. All right, let's see. So here, let's look at our employee again. This employee has Joyce Sandoval. She has 2 additional jobs, and it is giving me a count of 2. Okay, the next thing. So here I think we had we have the supervisory org level for the worker. So now I want to check if the worker belongs to supervisory org, which is at level 3, then he is working in a business unit. If he, for example, belongs to supervisory org, which is level 4, uh, or level 5, let's say he works for a department. If he works for supervisory org level 4, if he is working for a division, and so on and so forth. So in this entire column and all the rows, I basically have to check if employee belongs to X, then he should be aligned to a business unit. If his row value is 2, then he should belong to ABC. So this is an if else statement that I can build, right? And I can do that with the help of a function called case. So here I'll check if case is equal to 3, for example, then return value should be a business unit. If case is equal to 4, then return value is equal to some ABC. If case is equal to 5, then return value should be something else, right? So I am going to create a case here. Let's add a new calculator field. So all new fields are added at the end. Again, I am calling it employee grouping. Go to the functions library, and this is, if you see, a logical expression, right? Because I am logically evaluating a series of conditions. So let me click on plus and then go in here and add the values. Okay, so case when, which is our if condition, right? Again, I'm adding my,
Oh, you need to write code also like this.
yeah. So, but then it's not very complex as such, and there's information
Okay.
available in. So obviously, even you go for workday training, they don't teach you all these functions, right? But there's ample
I know.
information.
That's what I was thinking.
There's ample information available in community. So as such, it's not a big deal, right? So basically, what I'm checking is if org level from top, that is our field. I want to basically check because level 1 is obviously global modern services, and then level 2 is executive management group. So there's no one in that level, right? Or let's say, uh, what should I say? Yeah. So if this is equal to 3, then it should return me the value of business unit, right? And then
So it's like our coding, XSLT coding only, but it has our calc
mhm.
fields function, but it has some statements which you need to write in a
Okay,
certain
okay,
standard format, right? Is that the
all right.
correct
So
statement?
I have not worked on XSLT coding. I've done simple EIBs and connectors
Ah,
as such, but
okay, okay.
okay. So you have
But
experience in
I,
XSLT coding?
yeah, I'm strong in XSLT, so
Okay, and how easy or difficult to learn it is? Because I want to learn it as well,
I
but
think
could you?
it's pretty easy. It's not like we write very complex coding and all.
Mm-hmm.
It's pretty simple and straightforward. W3schools.com, that gives you a
Okay.
basic, that
Mm,
that really helps you to kickstart, basically to start with. Yeah.
okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
But if you're dealing with multiple nodes, if you're dealing with multiple root nodes and parent nodes and child nodes, if you're trying to
Mm-hmm.
extract the path from various different
Mm-hmm.
nodes from an XML, then that may be a bit of a complex, but otherwise, it's pretty straightforward, to be honest. Some people tend to make it complex to have that dependency, but I try to keep it very simple and straightforward. I mean, it depends
Got it.
on people.
Got it.
Though.
Got it.
It's, I mean, w3schools.com. So that's the best place to start with.
Start learning.
And
Okay.
yeah,
Okay. When let's quickly complete this. When org level from top is equal to 6, let's say, then it would be group. Else, finally, else everything else would be, let's say, T, and then I want to end it. Okay, I here I want to add one more condition probably. I want to say an or condition. So when let's say org level from top is equal to 1, or org level from top is equal to uh, let's say 2, then it should return corporation. Okay, let's see the
so yeah, the situation is like so. Let's say in general, we have something called lookup related value, right? In general, we have that
mm-hmm,
function. So
mm-hmm,
getting,
mm-hmm,
we have an instance. From that
mm.
instance, I want to get a certain related value. So is this
Mm.
something possible with it?
See,
So
most of
let's
these
say,
you have to do outside Prism. For example, you can still do that using your calculated fields, right? Within
okay,
your
okay,
reporting,
you do there and then bring it
and
here.
then you bring the appropriate data in, right? Because it's
So
ultimate.
yeah, yeah,
At least I would,
yeah.
that is the approach I follow. There
Hmm,
could be
hmm.
some new functions available because Workday keeps adding to the functions. So it
Correct,
has
correct,
recently added a few functions. So I believe there are a
correct.
few functions available. For example, there's another
Correct.
function police. It it
Hmm.
excuse me, it works in a similar manner, but then it checks between two different rows. So here, for
Okay.
example, what we are doing is it will basically check if hourly wage is available, which is if the worker is an hourly employee,
Mm.
then it will
Mm.
multiply hourly wage with 40 into 52. If it is not
Mm.
available, it will return salary. So it is
Ah,
checking
okay.
between two rows,
Right,
right?
right, right, right,
So that is
right.
available, but as such, I have not seen. I'll have to check. Probably there could be one available.
Mm.
You never know.
Okay, okay.
There
Because
are actually a lot of functions available. Workday has given a lot of things.
Mhm.
There are a lot
Yeah,
of
yeah, sure, sure. So looks like there's a lot to explore also.
yes.
What is the most widely used function in general, if I have to
In general, case and stuff. The one I'm referring, writing them
case?
down.
Okay,
Those are
okay,
some of the
okay,
functions that I have most commonly used. So that's why I have
okay,
noted down a few. But what I can also
okay.
do is I can get you, if you, I can get you some samples of other calculations as well. I can check in my own tenant and get you those.
Okay.
Okay. But
Yeah.
most commonly it is logical functions, most commonly it is date related functions. Conversion functions are used very often because you have to convert one thing into next thing so that you can do then that truncation and substring and stuff. So those are very commonly used.
Oh, yeah, yeah, makes sense. Sure, that helps.
Okay. uh, all right, there's one or two other functions. Now this is what I was talking about. Usually now in Workday, if you remember when we created our custom report, the
Right.
moment we add a currency field, the moment we add a field which has a currency name, automatically this show currency code is automatically added,
Mm-hmm.
right? Which means, for example, I cannot add two values because it already has the currency value included. Now, for these kind of scenarios, I'll have to extract the amount from this currency, right? Basically convert it into a numeric value. Right now, if you
Mm-hmm.
see, this is a field of type currency. Again, very common requirement with respect to your amount calculations. So I'm
Okay.
creating a new calculated field, right? And what I want is, I want to extract, I'm calling it, let's say, total base pay in employees local currency uh, amount, right? uh, let's say this is what I'm calling it. I'll go to functions library, and here is it under conversion. Yeah, so if you see here we have a lot of conversion related functions. I can convert something, build currency. I can take a amount and take a currency, and this will allow me to convert an amount field, a normal numeric field, into a currency value, right? Similarly, if I have a currency field, then I
Yeah.
can convert it into an amount, right? I can convert something into Boolean value, for example. I can convert something into date. I can convert something into, and so on and so forth. So again, one of the examples. So I want to extract the amount, an amount of the total base pay amount local currency. Now I have used this Prism calculated field that I have created. I want to convert it or use it into another calculation. So here we have all the amounts available, right? But I want to hide this field because I don't want to show this field to the outside world. I have only created it for the purpose of intermediate calculations. So if that is the case, even in our reporting, we create a number of fields, right, which are not on the report, simply used for intermediate calculations. Okay, so now I want to add a new field wherein my requirement is, I want to basically check which employee is probably getting the maximum base pay, right? So I want to check which employee is getting the maximum base pay in a given supervisory organization and for that gender. So let's say a given supervisory org has 50 employees. 20 of them are males and 30 of them are females. So I want to check out of those 20 males, uh, how many are, which employee has the maximum total base pay amount, and out of those 30 females, which employee has the maybe maximum base pay amount, right? Now we could not use directly this currency field for that because it is not allowed. That's why we had to first create this converted field, or we had to extract the amount. So now I'll go in here. I'll call it the max base salary, uh, suborg by gender, or supervisory organization and gender. Let's go to the functions library. Here we have a function. These are all called window function, and I'm selecting a function called maximum. So similarly, we have minimum, average, and quite a few. So I'm adding the maximum function. So I want to get the maximum of this field, right? The total base pay amount. So I'm selecting this one, total base pay amount. Sorry. So I want to get the maximum of this field. I want to partition it by, when I say partition by, it is based on which parameter I want to identify the maximum base pay amount. So in this case, if you see, my requirement is to get the maximum base pay amount for each supervisory org, but also for each, do I have a comma or not? We do have a comma, right? By gender. So I want to get the maximum base pay amount in each supervisory org and gender within that supervisory org, and I want to sort this in the order, uh, 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 I want to sort this again based on the total base pay amount. Let's see how my Prism calculation is behaving. Okay, so it shows 128037. Let's see. All right, so we have IT services group, 1 2 3 4 5 rows, in which we have uh, 2 females, 3 males. Mm, uh, what is the, let's only partition this by supervisory org, or probably I would order it by, let me order this by supervisory org. Okay, let's see what is happening now. Yes, okay. So here we have one, two, three. So everywhere, if you see the maximum in this section is 130240. For every employee, it is getting me 130240. So within that supervisory organization, I'm not sure why it, okay, because the first employee is null, it simply takes null for that employee. Let's see what is happening for this fifth worker, which is 183. Is he part of that supervisory organization? So till row number 5, it is IT services group. Uh, okay, but for row number 5, it gives me data as 171. Okay, I'll have to check why it is not getting me the right data. For this worker here as well, it should actually give me the maximum base pay amount. Okay, sure, I would check that. There could be some options that I'm missing. Makes sense what we are trying to do here, at least in theory. So we are trying to find the maximum
Yeah.
base pay
Yeah.
amount. Okay, but I'll have to check the function as such. All right. Uh, okay, there are a few other calculated fields. I would talk about that, but let me finally go in here. Now I can add a manage field stage and I can make all those changes. So here, uh, before adding a manage field stage, what I want is I want to hide this particular field because that field I only created for the purpose of my calculation. So this field, I don't want it to be displayed. So I am going to hide it, right? I only created it for the purpose of our calculation. And let me go ahead and save this. So now let's see if our field is visible. It would not be visible in the next section. I'm adding a manage field stage now. Okay, if you see that field is no longer visible in the next section. I also want to change the value. So here it should be only 2 digits. Right now I'm getting a lot of data. Age on hire, this is a double, but I can, for example, change it to numeric and I can change it to 2 digits. Right now it gives up to 10 decimal places and done. So a few conversions can happen directly through your manage fields. For a few other conversions, you have those conversion functions available. Right? So now, if you see age on hire, it gives me only 2 decimal places. So this conversion from double to numeric and all those simple conversions, instance to text, it directly happens on a manage field stage. You don't have to actually add a Prism calculated field for that. All right. Okay, now let's refresh our lineage. This is how our final outlook looks like, right? What I'll do is I'll go back to the data set and now we can go ahead and apply our Prism security, right? So finally, uh, the end result is that you can go ahead and secure your data set. If I do not secure my data set and directly go ahead and publish it, anyone who anyone who has access to the data catalog as such will be able to access. The moment I publish it, Workday creates a data source and anyone will be able to build reports using that data source. right? But then we would be applying the Prism source security for that. All right. Okay, let's stop here. Tomorrow we'll talk about the security and publishing our data set. And if time permits, or let's talk about it now. Sure. Okay. How does Prism security operates, right? So applying security to data sets. Okay. In order to apply security to the published data, right? The first thing, you must have access to domain, which is Prism manage data source, right? Now the second thing, Workday applies security to Prism data set in the form of data source security. So whenever you apply any security to the data set, Workday, when you publish the data set, Workday creates a data source. So your security is applicable on the data source, and it acts exactly similar to how your security operates on a normal data source, right? So only those people who have access to the data source, if you have created any custom report, you'll only be able to share that custom report with someone who has access to the data source on which that report is built, right? So the Workday Prism security operates at the data source level. When is the data source created? When your data set is published, right? So when you publish your data set, so when data set is published, right? Workday creates Prism data source, right? Applies security restrictions on the data source, right? Okay, now your security can operate at different levels. The first one, security restrictions. So at the first level, you can apply your security at the data source level itself, which is the entire data source. So here we basically do one thing, we specify one or more domains who will have access to every field within the Prism data source that is created, right? So just like we create, if you when you create a dashboard, right, Sai? On a dashboard, you specify a domain, right? And the security for that
Yeah, yeah.
dashboard is controlled by the domain. So here as well, it is exactly the same concept. You can specify either a custom domain. Workday has given some 100 plus custom domains, right? So either you can specify a custom domain, or you can select an existing domain, right? For example, workers and this and that. So every worker who has access to that domain would be able to access the entire data source. So at the first level, your security can be applied at the entire data source, which means all fields in that data source will be accessible, right? Okay, they would be accessible unless this is overwritten at the individual field levels. right? So we'll see how you can also specify security at the individual field levels. The second thing, so this security basically controls who can view and access the data source. So now how do I apply security on a data set? So before I publish this data set, I want to apply the security. So here we have security and I can edit the security for the data source. Okay. So when I go in here, I'll have the option to select the domains. So if you see, this is the security which operates at the data source level, right? So I can select any of the existing domains. For example, I am simply selecting some worker domain, and anyone who has access to that domain obviously will be able to access that data. So let's say uh, worker data staffing. Let's see if there is, sorry, I want to select worker staffing, staffing, worker data, general staffing information. I want to select worker data staffing, right? Because, and the reason I'm selecting this is because workers have some staffing related, uh, or these data sets that we have created, it has workers staffing related information, right? I want to also select worker data personal. Let's see. Uh, Worker, do we have worker data personal? Worker data add time, beneficiaries. I want to see worker data compensation because it has compensation related details. I want to see, I want to add uh, I also have the organization data, details of the workers organization. And I am basically checking the personal information. So here, if you see, the idea is only those people who have access to this domain, they would be able to access this data source, right? Okay, so now I have a person data name, uh, person data date of birth, because we have date of birth related details, person gender, because we have workers gender related details, and so on and so forth, right? So we see, this is how I can basically add, so any person who has access to this domain. And how do I know which person has access to this domain? If I go into the system, right, look at the domain security policy, we'll see all these security groups have currently access to this domain. Now, because I have added this domain to this data set, any members who are, anyone who is a member of this security groups will be able to access the data source which gets created. Make sense?
Yeah, 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 yeah. Got you.
Okay. The next level is your row level security. Now for row level security, you need to select something called an entity. Now I'll not talk about that now. We'll talk about that part tomorrow. So we would need something called securing entities, which is basically your organizations, company, supervisory org, locations, and so on and so forth. And this is basically my contextual security. We'll talk about this contextual security in tomorrow's class. All right. So I'll stop here. Tomorrow again, I'll try to do an extended class and make sure that at least by tomorrow, this is completed. And then we can also look at your um, discovery boards once again, right? With the Prism data set, Prism data sources. All right.